Week number 7 of the NFL season is officially here, so in today's video, I'm going to try and predict every single game of week number 7. So as I mentioned in today's video, I'm going to be trying to predict every single game of week number 7. There are two teams on bye weeks, those are the Dallas Cowboys and the Chicago Bears. So they, of course, will not be included in this video. I will be doing every single game, starting off with the Thursday Night Football matchup and ending off with our Monday Night Football matchup as well. But with that all said, if you guys do go on to enjoy the video, make sure you guys hit the like and subscribe button because that would help me out a ton, but let's get into it. And we are going to begin with the game that happens today on Thursday night, the Denver Broncos versus the New Orleans Saints. Now, both these teams are extremely injured right now, with the Saints missing their starting quarterbacks, the Broncos missing their most important piece on defense in Patrick Surtain, and a plethora of so many other players. I expect this game to be very ugly. I expect a lot of turnovers. I expect a lot of issues, both offensively and defensively for both these teams. Again, I expect sort of a sloppy game here. When I'm looking at which team is going to win a sloppy game, I definitely do think that this Broncos team is more suited to win those styles of games. Having Bo Nix, who at this point is playing some pretty good football right now in comparison to Spencer Rattler, who's only really had like one, maybe 2 quarters of good football, I definitely do think that that does play more in favor of this Broncos team. So if you're asking me, I think this Broncos team is more suited to win these styles of matchups, so I have the Denver Broncos winning 24-17 over the New Orleans Saints. Then we have our London game between the New England Patriots and the Jacksonville Jaguars. In Drake May's debut game last week, I thought he played pretty well. He got through his progressions, made a couple highlight plays, made a couple mistakes along the way, definitely was not perfect, but it looked good. Whereas for this Jaguars team, they are arguably one of the worst teams in the NFL. I feel like they're super talented and have a bunch of really good players, but none of it is really working right now. The coaching staff has lost the locker room. The team just doesn't play with spirit. They just don't care anymore. And I think this Patriots team is the opposite of that. They're playing for their coach. They're playing for positions. Drake May's brought a bunch of new energy into this franchise. And so because of that, I feel like the trend is going to continue for both these teams. I think the Patriots will win this game. I think they'll look better both offensively and defensively, whereas Jacksonville is going to continue on this downward trend. So give me the Patriots with a final score of 24-21. Then we have maybe the best matchup of the week. I would probably say it's second because we do have a big matchup later on in this video. But for now, I think this is clearly one of the biggest matchups of the week. And it is going to be between the Detroit Lions and the Minnesota Vikings. Now, Minnesota is coming off of a bye week and they are currently undefeated, whereas this Lions team does have a loss on their resume, but is coming off of a blowout victory over the Dallas Cowboys. Both of these teams would really benefit from winning this game. Obviously, for Detroit, that would get them lined up to be the front runner in the division. Whereas for Minnesota, if you win this game, you get a 2-game advantage over the Detroit Lions, which could be pivotal later in the season. I think both these teams are clearly top NFC contenders for not only the playoffs, but for the whole Super Bowl thing. And because of that, I expect a game that is going to be very intense and that should come down all the way to the wire. This is a bit of a toss-up here. I'm going to pick the team that has been playing good football for the past couple of seasons over a team that has sort of just been really good recently. I'm going to go with the Detroit Lions to win this one. I do expect this Vikings team to force some issues for this Detroit Lions offense, but because I think that Detroit can run the ball effectively and can methodically move the ball down the field without turning the ball over or making any sort of major mistakes, I think that definitely will work out for this Lions team. Again, it's not going to be an easy offensive showcase for this Lions team. I expect the Vikings to go out there and pull out all the tricks and all the things. But because this Lions team, in my opinion, is just really complete and can play any sort of type of ball game, I think they're going to find a way to win this matchup, but it's going to be very close, and I would not be shocked if Minnesota were to come out on top either. Next up, we have the Buffalo Bills versus the Tennessee Titans. Now, Amari Cooper just got traded to the Buffalo Bills. Is he going to play? I would imagine he might get a couple snaps in this game, which could be a nice little upgrade for this offense. Even if he doesn't play, I still feel like the outcome of this game is pretty obvious. I think Buffalo is very clearly the better team right now. Offensively for the Tennessee Titans, they just don't have it going. They have a quarterback issue. They're just not getting the ball out to their playmakers. They can't effectively run the ball, and their offensive line just isn't very good. I do think Tennessee's defense can keep them in this game for maybe 3 quarters, but I think by the time that 4th quarter comes around, I think Buffalo could lay on like 10 points extra in that 4th to make this one a not so close contest. I've lost basically all my faith in Will Levis, and I would not be shocked if he maybe got benched during this game because I think it could get potentially ugly later, as I mentioned. So with that said, I'm going to pick Buffalo to win this one in fairly dominant fashion with a final score of 31-13. Next up, we have the Indianapolis Colts versus the Miami Dolphins. For the Colts, I do expect Jonathan Taylor and Anthony Richardson both to play, whereas for the Miami Dolphins, I do not expect Tua to play. So if Tua were to, for whatever reason, play in this game, that obviously changes everything up, but I'm going to make a pretty fair assumption that he isn't going to play. I expect this one to be a pretty easy game for the Indianapolis Colts. Just simply put, without Tua Tagovailoa on this Dolphins offense, they are inept. They cannot physically move the ball down the field effectively. They don't have the run game that can support a bad quarterback, and they just cannot find a way to get the ball to their playmakers without Tua, working his magic. This is a good enough Colts defense that I don't feel like they're going to have too many issues covering up these plays that they're going to try to run. Though I will say, I could imagine a world where Miami maybe gets a big explosive play from Tyreek Hill throughout this game, but it won't be consistent and it won't be enough for them to win the game ultimately. But I could imagine like 1 or 2 plays where Tyreek or Jalen or whoever just goes out there and makes a big splash play, and then of course they probably will settle for a field goal or something like that. But with Anthony coming back, I expect this offense to move the ball. As long as they don't have like over 3 turnovers, they should pretty easily win this game. I don't think it'll be a blowout, but I think that this will be a Colts victory 21-14. Next up, we have a massive matchup for both these teams between the Atlanta Falcons and the Seattle Seahawks. This has, in my opinion, big NFC playoff implications. For the Falcons, obviously, you're in a tough race right now to win your division with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And if you can get this win here, the Buccaneers have a tough matchup this week, which potentially could put you in a firm position to win this division. Whereas for Seattle, it's kind of the same conversation. You're currently second, basically tied up with the 49ers. Obviously, you lost to them this week. But if you get a victory this week, San Francisco also has a very tough matchup, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. So if they were to lose that game, you would obviously move up to number 1. This is also a game that, in my opinion, kind of allows both these teams to sort of prove who they really are. For Seattle, you've won the first 3 games, then you've lost the past couple, and you have not looked as good since you've, had these tougher matchups. And now you get a chance to prove yourself once again against a very good Falcons team. Whereas for this Falcons team, you've obviously had a couple tough matchups like the Eagles, the Chiefs, and a couple others, but now you get another chance to prove yourself against a potential NFC playoff team. I expect Atlanta to be able to run the football. Obviously, Seattle's defense isn't playing very good right now, so I expect this Falcons offense to do a lot of really good things. For me, this game kind of comes down to which offense is going to make more mistakes, and because I just don't think this Falcons team is going to make those mistakes, I think they're going to find a way to win this one because of Seattle's inability to not make mistakes. So because of that, I'm going to pick the Falcons to win this game 27-21 of Seattle. Next up, another massive game, and this one might honestly be just as important as the Detroit Lions and Vikings game and a couple other games we're going to talk about in the Green Bay Packers versus the Houston Texans. This is a freaking loaded week. This one is almost impossible for me to predict because I like both these teams a crap ton. I think both these teams have incredible futures with great young quarterbacks, great offensive and defensive minds. This game is going to be intense. It's going to be down to the wire, and I think it's going to be an incredible matchup between 2 teams that both clearly want to contend for Super Bowls. Now, Houston is, in my opinion, playing better football than the Green Bay Packers. Green Bay kind of started off the season a little bit slow when Jordan Love was healthy, and then last week and this week they've started to put the pieces together, and now it looks like they're prepared to play their best game of the season in perfect timing going up against the Houston Texans. This is a massive game for both CJ Stroud and Jordan Love for their MVP odds. I think the winner of this game, if of course the quarterback does play well, could potentially move up the MVP ladder. And so again, this is a 50-50 game. I don't really honestly have too much reasoning as to why I picked the team that I'm going to pick to win the game. I just feel like it could come down to like a game-winning drive, and I'm going to put my money on Jordan Love. I think Stroud is going to play fine. I think that offense and defense is going to play some really good football, but I do think this Packers team can make enough plays to win this game. Again, I don't really have a reason as to why. It is quite literally a coin flip for both these teams. These teams are incredible. I'm just going to pick Jordan Love. That's just my reasoning. So with that said, I'm going to pick the Packers to win this one 31-30. I'm sorry I couldn't give you guys like a full-on breakdown as to why I picked the Packers. It's just a coin toss in my opinion. These are 2 great teams that are Super Bowl contenders, and I just don't know who's going to win this one because it's so freaking close. Moving on, we have an AFC North matchup between the Cleveland Browns, who just traded away Amari Cooper, and the Cincinnati Bengals, who are now 2-4. For Cincinnati, this is another one of those must-win games early on this season. Obviously, this Browns team just is not a very good football team, so if you're Cincinnati, you have got to take care of business this week. For Cleveland, I just don't really know where you're going to find your offense from. Yes, Nick Chubb is supposed to come back this week, but what are we really expecting from a guy who's coming off a broken leg? I expect Nick Chubb to maybe get 10 carries at most, but barring some sort of explosive play that Nick Chubb is able to muster out there, I don't really think that they're going to be able to do a whole lot against this Bengals defense, who, yeah, this Bengals defense hasn't been good this year, but that Cleveland offense is even worse. And even though I expect this game maybe heading into halftime to be very close, eventually Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and that offense will figure things out and put up enough points to find a way to win this game. I just personally don't believe that Deshaun Watson and this offense, especially now that Mark Cooper is gone, can go down the field and, consistently put up points and consistently put together methodical drives. So because of that, I'm obviously going to pick Cincinnati, who needs to win this game more so than Cleveland because, quite frankly, Cleveland is probably tanking for a quarterback. So with that said, I'm not going to pick the upset here. I'm going to pick Cincinnati to win this one 28-13. Next up, a massive NFC East matchup between the Philadelphia Eagles and the New York Giants. For Philadelphia, obviously, you're trying to catch up to the Washington Commanders. For the Giants, you're obviously just kind of fighting for pride out there. You're trying to win the game, but obviously this team isn't quite a playoff contender, at least in my opinion. So I don't think this game has incredible playoff implications or anything like that, but it's still going to be a fun NFC East matchup. For Philadelphia, I feel like you have to sort of prove yourself here. You have not put together a great game, maybe outside of that Packers game, outside of like the first couple turnovers from Jalen. I feel like for Philadelphia, as long as you don't turn the ball over, which I don't think they will because this Giants team just doesn't have a great defense, then I think they should easily find a way to win the game. And barring Malik Neighbors just having an outstanding game, which he very well could have, I feel like Philadelphia will find a way to win this one. With that said, I do expect a big game from Malik Neighbors. I actually do think this Giants team can actually move the ball down the field. It's really just going to come down to, can they convert when they get into the red zone? Or once they get past the 50-yard line, can they move the ball enough to go out there and score touchdowns? And because I'm not that confident in Daniel Jones, that running game, and honestly that whole entire team, I just feel like Philadelphia will be able to do enough good things to win the game. I think the keys for Philadelphia: don't turn the ball over, run the ball effectively, control time of possession, and you'll find a way to win this one. So with that said, I'm gonna have Philadelphia winning with a final score of 28-18. Next up, we have the LA Rams versus the Las Vegas Raiders. The Rams are in a terrible position. They have a ton of injuries. Stafford's getting older, isn't playing very great right now. Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp are both out. Then you got this Raiders team that is also not playing very good football. The Rams are currently 1-4 coming off a bye week, whereas the Raiders just traded away Devontae Adams, so it's pretty clear that both these teams don't really know what they're trying to do. It feels like the Rams want to contend, they just don't have the guys out there to actually get the job done. Whereas for the Raiders, they're kind of stuck in the no man's land right now. So I do expect this game to be kind of interesting to see what these teams want to do out there. Are they actually going to try and compete to actually win the game, to maybe somehow pursue a late push to make the playoffs later in the season? Or is it one of those things where maybe both these teams are kind of content with just having a bad game so that they can go out there and maybe get a higher draft pick? I don't know. Obviously, we're only at week 7, so it's not 100% sure what these teams are going to do or what they're going to be, but both these teams just, quite frankly, are not very good. The Raiders have some good pieces, but the offense isn't good, obviously, and the defense isn't great either. Whereas for the Rams, yes, you have a Hall of Fame level quarterback, and when healthy, you have a good team, but you haven't shown the ability to actually do anything on the defensive side of things to sustain your offense. So with that said, I am going to pick the Rams to win, but I don't feel terribly confident about that. The Rams just have not looked very good, but at the same time, it's hard to really predict the Raiders to win a game. So with that said, if Matthew does play, and he does play fairly well, doesn't turn the ball over, I think they'll win with a score of 24-17. But if there are some turnovers, I think that could potentially sway my opinion, and maybe the Raiders could win, but I'm going to stick with the Rams. Next up, we have the Washington Commanders versus the Carolina Panthers. This should be a pretty fun game because obviously we get to see more of Jaden Daniels, and I think Jaden Daniels will have a very good game against what is a bad Panthers defense. This isn't really a prove-it game for Washington. They've obviously shown the ability to be able to compete with a team like a Ravens, for example, but this is a game where they can flex their muscles and go out there and be a bad team in the Carolina Panthers. I do expect the Panthers to be able to do something on the offensive end. I don't think it'll be enough to obviously win the game, but I think they could probably drop a couple points on this Commanders defense that just isn't very good. But ultimately, when it comes down to which offense can go out there and score more, I'm obviously picking Jaden Daniels in this Commanders team because they've proven to be able to do so. So with that said, I'm going to pick Washington to win with a final score of 38-20. Then we have our Super Bowl rematch between the San Francisco 49ers and the Kansas City Chiefs. Kansas City obviously does not have Rashee Rice, and I would say that San Francisco just put together their best game of the season so far. Obviously, Christian McCaffrey isn't playing in this game, so that definitely could loom large for this Niners team. But if I'm the Niners, I feel like this is somewhat of a must-win game for this team. For starters, obviously, you want to continue to stay ahead in your division. I do expect Seattle to put up a fight, so if they were to win that game, obviously, if San Francisco were to lose, then Seattle would be number one. But I think more importantly for the Niners, I don't really feel like the division really matters that much because I think they will win the division. But I think just morally and mentally, like knowing that you got that victory over a Kansas City team would just mean so much to those players in the organization and the fan base. For a San Francisco team that hasn't had much success against this Chiefs team, I feel like this is almost as must win as I've seen for this Niners team. Whereas for the Chiefs, obviously you really have nothing to prove. You're going to be in the playoffs. You're one of the best teams out there. Your defense is outstanding, but you do have a couple offensive issues. And so far this year, Mahomes hasn't really looked Mahomey, if you get my point. He hasn't played great this year. He's had a couple bad turnovers. He doesn't really have the receiving core to make the big plays that he would like to do. Obviously, Worthy is a big play waiting to happen, but it's just a matter of will there be a coverage bust or will they get him out in space to make that big play? And with this Niners team, like I said, coming off their best performance of the season, I feel like they're kind of peaking right at the right time against this Chiefs team that feels like they're kind of just staying in the middle of things where they just don't know who they're going to be and what their identity is without Rice or without their running back. So because of the injuries and because I think San Francisco has so much more in this game, I'm going to pick the Niners to win this one with a final score of 27-24. Next up, we have the New York Jets versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Jets just traded for Devontae Adams, who I expect to play because of his connection with Aaron Rodgers. So if he does play, that obviously does help this offense out quite a bit. Now, they have a really tall task offensively to go out there and try to protect Aaron Rodgers from guys like, of course, TJ Watt. And by the way, I expect TJ Watt to have a massive game this week. I would not be shocked if he absolutely wreaks havoc on Aaron Rodgers all night. But ultimately speaking, Russell Wilson's first game for the Steelers team going up against this great Jets defense, I don't really feel like that's a recipe for success. Because this Steelers team hasn't proven the ability to consistently run the football effectively, especially now that Justin Fields isn't the starting quarterback, I feel like that definitely does favor a team like the Jets. This is also kind of a must-win game for the Jets too. They kind of have to win this game versus Pittsburgh or else their season is for real done. So I am going to pick the Jets to win this one. They have so much going into it. They have to get a win. And I also do think it's a kind of favorable matchup. Again, I think TJ Watt could single-handedly win the Pittsburgh Steelers this game, but I'm just going to assume that doesn't happen. Next up, incredible matchup here between the Baltimore Ravens and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. As I mentioned earlier, for the Buccaneers, this has massive implications for their own division because I do expect Atlanta to be in the conversation to win that division the rest of the season. So for the Buccaneers, you've obviously lost the head-to-head against Atlanta. The last thing you want to do is get one game extra behind them. But you got a tough task in front of you, man. Stopping Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson just is simply almost flat out impossible to do. The offensive line for this Ravens team has improved so tremendously from the first game of the season, and just the way this offense has just flowed so perfectly with Lamar and Derrick Henry has made this team just so darn hard to cover and defend against. And because I just don't think this Buccaneers team stacks up very well against them, especially with all the injuries they're dealing with on the defensive side of things, I feel like it definitely does favor the Ravens to win this one by a pretty wide margin. Now, I do expect this Buccaneers team to find a way to keep this thing interesting, but I kind of feel like this game is going to be very similar to the Baltimore Ravens versus the Commanders game last week, where Baltimore was just able to put everything together and just kind of stay in the lead for the entire game without really being terribly dominant. Whereas for like Washington, it obviously looked like they belong, and I feel like that's what you're going to feel like with this Buccaneers team, where it's Ravens are going to win, but the Buccaneers feel like they can easily get that matchup later in the season. So with that said, I am going to pick the Ravens to win this one. I expect it to be a close game, but I feel like the Ravens are going to be able to find a lead and just continue to sprinkle on points to stay in the lead for the entire game. So I'm going to pick the Ravens to win with a final score of 33-27. Then we have our last game of the video and our second Monday Night Football game, which I absolutely hate, by the way, and that is the LA Chargers versus the Arizona Cardinals. This Chargers team ranks very highly on a bunch of different defensive statistics, but this is a really good test for them to see where they're actually at. Say what you want to say about this Cardinals team. Obviously, they don't have the defense to stack up against most good teams, but they do have a decent offense. But I am going to assume that Marvin Harrison Jr. doesn't play because of the concussion issue, which I think that is a huge problem for this Arizona Cardinals team. And because I have so much respect for what I've seen from this Chargers defense, I do feel like the Chargers have a major upper hand advantage in this one. And it felt like last week this offense finally got some things going with Justin Herbert and this offense. So if they can just continue to build off of that, I feel like they're going to find a way to get a bit of a statement win here. Yes, I said statement win here because this is a team that hasn't really beaten any good teams or quality offenses, and this is a Cardinals team that isn't a quality team, but does have a quality offense. And the reason why I think it's going to be a statement game is because I think it's going to be a low-scoring defensive effort that the Chargers will find a way to win with a final score of 20-13. But with that all said, those are my picks. I'm going to pop it up right here. These are all my picks. And if you guys enjoyed the video, make sure you guys hit the like and subscribe button. And I love you guys. Peace.